Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a Diablo and Overwatch news wrap-up video where we give our thoughts on the happenings of the week. This is our 12th episode in the series, so if you've missed any previous episodes, you can go check those out and make sure you have subscription notifications turned on. Now, before we dive into the news, I'll just quickly mention that if you want to get your name on the Rhykkers Raiders 2017 t-shirt, you have until the end of September. Link in the description below on how to do that. Alright, diving into Diablo news. So if you're just here for Overwatch, you can skip ahead to the time indicated above. So the big Diablo news this week is that a new PTR patch has gone up now with yet more updates, more buffs, more craziness happening. We still don't know when the patch will go live or when Season 12 will start, but it seems we're getting close. Let's briefly touch upon the changes that we're seeing right now, and it starts actually with a nerf to the ZDPS Globe Necromancer. We spoke about this. We spoke about the community complaining about this build a couple weeks back. This was the support Necromancer that would just spawn a crap ton of health globes for the party. This has now been nerfed. He cannot spawn as many health globes. But now onto the buffs and buffs and buffs. The Jade Witch Doctor build. We've got a build guide on that. It's now even stronger than it was in that build guide. Condemned Crusader got another buff. It is now very viable. Captain America got a nerf, but it was a little bit out of control. Captain America should still be viable even after the nerf. Unhallowed Essence multi-shot build got a big buff. It is now nearing the top Demon Hunter builds. Marauder got even more buffs, keeping it on top. It's probably going to be the top Demon Hunter build for Season 12. Wizard, oh my god, huge news for the Wizard. For people who are sick of Archon Wizards, not only do we have the Delzier's Magnum Opus, the DMO Wizard being viable, being arguably the best build, but now we've actually got a Channeling Wizard. You can use either Firebirds or Talrashas, both are very, very strong. This is a non-Archon build, it's still new, and it's looking like it's going to be possibly the top, if not runner-up for the top Wizard build of Season 12. We've got yet another buff to the Whirlwind Barbarian. This is now going to be one of the best builds in the game, period. Barbarians are getting a huge amount of love in Season 12. Charge Barb, another big buff, very viable. The Roland Crusader got a buff, more viable now. Invokers, Thorns Crusader got an insane buff. It's looking to be possibly the strongest, if not one of the strongest, Crusader builds. For the Monk, Inna got buffed a bit, Raymond got buffed a bit. These were already really strong Monk builds, so it's just kind of trying to get them in line now with the other crazy buffed stuff. Uliana got buffed even more. For the Necromancer, we're seeing buffs to Rothmas, to Anarius, to Pestilence, and overall it's looking now like all the Necromancer sets, all four of them are roughly equally powerful. This is in theory, looking at the numbers, that's the way the math lines up. Helltooth for the Witch Doctor got a crazy buff. Helltooth is looking to be the best Witch Doctor build right now. Helltooth Firebats. And then you also have the Helltooth Gargantuan build, which is very strong. Arakir also got a buff, so Arakir Firebats is even stronger than it was. Zunimasa's another buff, very strong. So all around, with all these buffs, we're getting more and more into power creep territory. However, again, remember that it's all in the name of making the game better. And we actually had a blog post go up from Blizzard by Don Vu. We've spoken about Don Vu in past weeks. Ever since he returned to the Diablo team from his stint in World of Warcraft, he has been doing an excellent job communicating, and this blog post, so he's been communicating in the forums, for instance, but now he wrote this blog post, which clearly lays out their design intentions for this patch. It's great to get that insight on what the developers are thinking when they're making these changes, and Don Vu expressed that there's two main goals for this patch. If you want to read this blog post yourself, I'll have a link to that in the description below. But there were two main goals, and the first was we wanted each class to have multiple builds with different styles that can play in similar difficulties. And this was very obvious from the start, from the very first PTR patch notes. Then the second goal was to smooth out the overall endgame experience. Quote, this means making sure each build plays well in high-density situations and group play. And I think this is why we're seeing a lot of those toughness buffs. A lot of those, basically quality of life, it's probably not the correct vernacular to use here, but just making the builds more pleasurable to play. When you're not dying as often, it's less frustrating to play a build. It feels better. Having fewer frustrating mechanics to work around, just less clunky builds. I think that's what he's referring to here. Now, while the buffs have been crazy extensive, yes, there are some sets that haven't been buffed, or that have not been buffed enough. But this is intended. Quote, while we may not have raised every build in the game to the top bar, we think that's okay. Some builds can just be fun and own their place in lower difficulties as stepping stones or for farming. Those types of builds are important too, and not all builds can fulfill every role. And I think that's perfectly okay. The problem previously was that there was not enough choice for a player to make if you wanted to be competitive, if you wanted to feel just as powerful as other people. You were shoehorned into one, maybe two viable endgame builds. And so I don't think we need every build to be viable endgame. We don't need every set necessarily to be a top Greater Rift pushing set. But as long as we have enough options to feel like there is diversity and that there is a choice to make. Further in the post, Don Vu expressed that basically they heard our complaints about Archons for Wizard, and that's why they're trying to give us some viable non-Archon builds, and I'm sure this is super appreciated by Wizard players everywhere. But the other key piece of information we got from this post is, quote, we're locking down on changes now to smooth out bugs and performance issues, as well as other fine-tuning steps before patch launch. Don't expect too many more sweeping changes for patch 261, barring anything game-breaking we need to address post-patch or via a hotfix. So this basically means this was the last round of buffs, most likely that we're going to see in the test server. At this point, they're just going to see if anything is crazy overpowered, they'll nerf it. If anything is broken, they'll fix it. But that means we're getting close to the end of PTR, folks. So this is good news for the game, and it's also good news for the community because it's showing Blizzard being very communicative, and this is just great insight, again, into their decisions. We can now understand, and we can only hope that this type of transparency continues going forward. But what do you folks think about all this? What do you think about patch 261? Is it too little, too late? For you, is this just same old, same old? I personally think it's going to bring the game into possibly the best state it's ever been, but I must admit that I would have hoped this would have happened a long time ago. And the last bit of Diablo news that I want to show here is just a commercial that was made by the Blizzard Korea team. This is an advertisement for the Necromancer pack. It's really well made and it's really funny, and what you're seeing right here is actually the Chinese dub so that we can have some subtitles, but it was originally made in Korean. These are Korean actors, and it's just really funny. I'll have a link in the description below. Do check it out, it's just a couple minutes. Alright, on to Overwatch news. Now, last week we had a big discussion about toxicity in games, and this has been building up for a couple weeks now. Well, this week, game director Jeff Kaplan released an entire dev update video just talking about this. And it's a bit sad that Jeff had to release a whole video just addressing toxicity, but he actually makes a point later in the video that highlights what this is symptomatic of. So one thing that Jeff was saying was that he wants a system where people are notified when their reports, when they report other player, when the reports are actioned upon. And they've already started implementing that partially. Not everyone gets the email, but some people do, and people have confirmed, yes, I've received an email. He eventually wants to move away from an email system and have it just be notified directly in-game, but he feels that this is something important, that for you to feel like it is worth it to report people, that you need to be notified. You need to know when your report makes a difference, because you often hear people say, don't bother reporting, it doesn't do anything. Why should I waste the few clicks, the 30 seconds of my time it takes to report and whatever, when it does nothing? Well, Jeff gave us some numbers. He assured us that the report action does work, that over the course of Overwatch, they have actioned over 480,000 accounts, and of those, 340,000 were a result of reporting. So that's a huge chunk of those actioned accounts that came from people just reporting other people. Now, going back to last week's video on toxicity, I feel like the majority of us are on the same page about being opposed to toxicity, but there certainly is, and there certainly are those of you who aren't as opposed to it, that kind of do want to have that freedom to be toxic. Those of you saying, you know, just get over it. Just get over it. Someone's calling you names, just man up, just ignore it. And I respect your opinion and your right to say it, and we could disagree on this matter and still have a civil discourse, and I appreciate that we kept the discourse civil. That said, Jeff Kaplan came out and made a very strong stance. I was not expecting this, especially coming from Jeff Kaplan, and we'll explain why in a bit. But I feel that Jeff Kaplan came down with an even stronger stance than I was taking. Jeff Kaplan said, quote, "Our highest level philosophy is, if you're a bad person doing bad things in Overwatch, we don't want you in Overwatch. We don't want to create areas for you where just the bad people are in Overwatch. We don't want those people in Overwatch. Overwatch should be an inclusive game space. It's an inclusive, aspirational universe, and the gameplay experience should match what Overwatch is hoping to achieve." What I found particularly striking here was that we don't want to create areas for you where just the bad people in Overwatch are, because that was a proposed solution, that have a safe space for toxicity. Have an outlet where toxic people can go and just be toxic with each other. People were suggesting that rather than being banned, just get put into a separate pool of players. But now Jeff has been very clear that no, they don't even want to do that. And now Jeff admits that he has said mean things on the internet, so he's not pretending to be some paladin here. He expresses that we've all at some point or another taken part in this toxic behavior, but I think Jeff is kind of downplaying his past here. There's a famous message that goes around that was written by Jeff Kaplan before he worked in the video game industry. A message that he sent to EverQuest developers because he had some very strong thoughts on what they were doing with their game. So, quote, "Whoever came up with this sheer of an encounter can go themselves. Do me a favor so I don't waste my guild's time on this kind of fest again. Send me an email at blah 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 when you decide to A, implement an encounter that wasn't designed by a chimp chained to a cubicle, B, get a quality assurance department, and C, actually beta test the thing, and D, patch it live. And please, for God's sake, do it in the order I laid it out for you. Don't worry, I won't charge you a consulting fee on that one. And for good luck, you might as well E, pull your heads out of your while you're at it, rename the game to Beta Quest since you've used up your allotted false advertising karma on the bazaar and user interface scam of 01. Fix the Emperor encounter. Fix Saru. Rethink your time sync. Fix all the buggy ring encounters. I suggest you let whoever made the Burrower one do this, since that dude apparently laid off the crack the rest of you were smoking. Fix the VT key quest. Fix VT. Just guessing it's considering your track record. Don't have the resources to fix this stuff? Move the entire Planes of Power team over to fixing Shadows of Luklin, and do it now. If you don't fix Luklin, you will be the only ones playing the Planes of Power. That was Jeff Kaplan. So you can argue that this is the pot calling the kettle black, but you can also view this as, well, clearly Jeff in the past was someone who had no issue with toxicity, let's say. But with time and maturity, he's now embraced a different philosophy and thinks that there's a more positive way to put forth a message. And to that end, he actually flips it to the community. He says that the community needs to take some responsibility. The community needs to be accountable to itself and its behavior. There's only so much policing that they could do. And he basically said that having to deal with this means you're getting content slower, folks. He says that the team wants to make new maps, new characters, new cinematics, but they've had to spend, quote, a tremendous amount of time and resources punishing people and making people behave better. And that because of this, it's taking longer to put out content. So what do you folks think about all this? Do you think Jeff's being too tough on toxicity? Too lenient? Do you think it should be the developer's job to police things? Or do you think it's up to the community to just be nicer? And one thing I'll need to specify here, because I feel I didn't do a strong enough job of doing that in last week's video, but toxicity is not just what you type. Because yes, you can mute players, and that's great. However, you cannot mute actions. And that's my biggest issue with toxicity. When people are doing things in-game that are sabotaging their own team. And I don't mean just being bad at the game, that's fine. I mean deliberately walling in your team. I mean deliberately going to kill yourself to feed the enemy team ult. I know people that have become so frustrated that they've stopped playing this game due to people throwing their games in competitive. This is toxicity that cannot be ignored, cannot be avoided, cannot be muted. You cannot man up to people trolling you in-game. When someone like this is in your game, you've basically just won the you lottery, because there's nothing that you can do other than try your best while you're a man down, or worse than a man down. You can be actively hindering your team and just ruining your experience. It's not fun in any way to play with someone who's behaving like this. So my question to those defending toxicity, to those saying, oh, you know, you're overreacting, man up, what's your response to that specifically? I could understand the argument of people being toxic with regards to what they type. Yes, you can mute people. But what about the actions? What's your response to that? Because a lot of people's response is, I'm not gonna play a game that's not fun to play. Alright, on to some awesome news, and I think the rest of this video will just be awesomeness. That's enough negativity today. Blizzard released a new Junkertown preview video, and I didn't expect to like it as much as I did. Do check that out for yourselves, folks. I'll put a link in the description below. But we learn a lot of lore, we learn also about the game design, we get to see the evolution of the map from a visual perspective. There's just so much in this video, a little bit of something for everyone, regardless of what your interests are. First, they dropped some lore bombs talking about how after the Omnic crisis, the Australian government tried to make peace with the Omnics. Basically, the government was offering the land around the Omnium for the Omnics to populate, but unfortunately that would mean displacing a bunch of solar farmers and just human Australians, including Roadhog, and that obviously pissed them off. So then this group of displaced Australians decided to fight back against the Omnium, and they succeeded, and then they kind of built this town over the remains, and that's Junkertown. And the team went to great efforts to describe this area in Junkertown called the Scrapyard. This is where there's sort of gladiatorial fights that go on, and that there was one person who was very charismatic and an excellent fighter who was, I suppose, the reigning champion and became the queen of Junkertown. So now she leads this town and everyone basically bows to her will. She's a very important figure. And they said that Junkrat and Roadhog basically went on this tour around the world to steal a bunch of loot just to get back into the queen's good graces. Except there were also explosives. Now, these gladiator matches involved humans getting into mechs and fighting each other or fighting Omnics, and you can see mechs that look very reminiscent of D.Va's Junker skin, so whether this is just a reference or whether D.Va did at some point maybe go fight in there, who knows? But it does beg the question, will the Queen become a playable character? Now that they've really highlighted the fact that she's such a powerful fighter, it does seem to be leaning a little bit more that way, but what do you folks think? Do you think the Junker Queen will one day become a playable character? And the other really cool thing with this video was also that they showed how they recorded a lot of the sounds for Junkertown. They basically visited this ghost town, this rusty ghost town, and played with the equipment, and that's how they recorded really authentic sounding audio. And that was just fascinating to see the process, the thoughts going into it, and then again, the visual, the evolution of the map design is just a surprisingly captivating video to watch. Also, in awesome news, we've got an Overwatch free weekend coming up September 22nd to 25 on PC, PS4, and Xbox One. And two final awesome things I want to highlight, both fan-made. Here is a fan-made Orisa skin. Looks really nice. It's maybe slightly too visually busy to be an Overwatch skin, but it could always be toned down, you can always remove detail, but it's great art, executed really well, excellent idea, concept, I'd use that skin. And then lastly, we have this guy who made this fully functional D.Va mech, apparently for his daughter, but I don't know if he made it for his daughter or for himself. But just the engineering that went into this, it moves, it has rotating guns, it has steam, articulated legs, it's just awesome. Go have a look at the video. And that wraps up our news for this week. But don't forget to leave a comment with your thoughts on any and all news stories that we've covered. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. Check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykkers Raiders for more Overwatch and Diablo content.